Together this blog by Bhargav Bachina, which is about um, how to implement micro front-end architectures with Angular. And so everything you need to know about microservice-oriented architecture for the front end, from beginner to advanced modern web applications, are becoming more complex and sometimes managed by different teams. And so your application might have features developed by different teams, and you want to release only certain features into production before delivering the entire application. How do you manage the different teams, different release timelines if you have one repo? And so most of these complex applications live on the client side, which makes it harder to maintain. And there are some other issues as well as with this monolithic big fat application. And so in this post, we are going to talk about the advantages, disadvantages, implementation, and a lot of other stuff. So essentially, micro frontends are basically doing the same thing of dividing up the front end into smaller pieces managed by different teams, as opposed to a monolithic front end, just as we used to have monolithic backends, and then we split them up into microservices. And so we have introduction, journey into micro frontends, advantages of micro frontends, features, how do we split apps, different approaches, micro frontend frameworks, example micro frontend project with Angular, summary, and conclusion. Now, as I've just explained what micro frontends are, I'm going to cut short on the introduction things and kind of try to jump straight into the nitty-gritties and the details. Okay, so we're going to skip most of this introduction and kind of jump down to this diagram. Here is basically showing us the micro front-end architecture. So what's happening is that there is a backend and there are multiple apps, app 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are communicating with an event bus. And then there's the kind of the bootstrap application or the launch application, and that talks to the browser. So we essentially have 6 front-end applications working together to deliver the larger application. Now, the communication between these apps can be done with an event bus, a window object, or a pub/sub model or pub/sub methods. Now, each of these applications can be implemented by a separate team in any framework. So you can do app 1 in React, you can do app 4 in Angular, I assume. We'll find out. And then the Bootstrap launch application loads all of the apps and mounts and unmounts them in the DOM depending on the user interaction or the routing. So journey into micro frontends. We will first understand why we need this in the first place. I think that should be obvious, but it's coming soon anyway in this blog. Advantages of micro frontend: apps are smaller, independent, easier to understand, easier to develop and deploy, easier to test. Development becomes faster, CI/CD pipelines become easier, independent stacks and versions, and no shared code. Can change architecture easily without touching the old one, so less error prone and breakage prone, right? Okay, so features of micro frontends. Each front end represents a specific feature or subdomain of the entire application. Each front end can be implemented with a separate team. Each front end can be implemented with a different technology. They cannot share logic and they are independent, and each one can be owned by a single team. How do we split the apps? We can split them by feature. We can split them by section, by page, by domain. Okay, so let's take a look at how we might split them by feature. So there's a single page application that would have had different features like dashboard, profile, and views. Now these become the different apps and we can launch things by feature. So we have a dashboard app, profile app, views app. By section, so we may also do it by have different apps by section, like the header app, the mail app, the calendar app, and the footer app. And each app is its own scenario and they are combined into a single page app, and in this case they will be different apps which will be combined by the launch app. Again, single page app could have had different pages of a flow, page 1, 2, 3, 4. And now these pages could be a different app. Okay. So perhaps this may be in a more traditional app also, like you have your contact pages or you have the blog pages, and so they can be different apps, like your blog app and your contact app. By domain, you may have split your app in core app, payments app, profile app. So you can have different apps based on the domains. And so you can have different approaches to micro front ends. And there are many approaches that you could implement with micro front ends, but I found these 6 ways to implement. Here is an article that I've written about these 6 ways. Okay, well, we're going to talk about that article later. But for now, we have these ways as iframes, through Nginx, through web components and Angular elements, through Angular libraries, monorepos, customized orchestrator, micro front-end frameworks. Micro front-ends have been implemented for at least 2 years, and it is still a green field. Have you ever wondered if there's any framework or libraries to implement these to make our jobs easier? The answer is yes, and there are a couple of libraries or frameworks like the Single SPA and Frontend.js. Single SPA is a JavaScript framework for front-end microservices and can be implemented with all 3 popular frameworks, such as Angular, React, and Vue. It can lazy load the applications based on the need, and you can check out their website for more information. Frontend.js is a modular JavaScript framework for building scalable and reactive applications. It does not support Angular yet, but supports React. And if you're building a reactive application from scratch or you're just starting, this is the framework for you. You can check out their website for more. Example of micro front-end projects with Angular. Okay, so here you have the header as an app, the dashboard as an app, and the footer as an app. And the root application. So you're going to get 4 applications. So here's the 4 repository for the 4 apps. You will clone this as micro header, git, micro dashboard, git, and so on, and run them on different ports. Now, you can access the entire application on port 4200, which will be combining the applications from the other ports. So, okay. Now here's the micro root app index.html. We are importing all 3 apps on line 10 and registering the apps with the appropriate name and location. Let's take a look at line 10. So here we have script type system.js import map, and here are imports. Footer is localhost 4201, dashboard and header have their own ports, and then you've got the single SPA library, which is included here as well. And so with these imports, this is your import map as a script. And then there's this loading, and then there's another script, which is then registering the application. And it is registering the different applications, the header application, the dashboard application, and the footer application. And at the end of it, doing a single SPA.start. So the single SPA was passed into this from this library. Okay. You can give the header location path, so the header is loaded when browser URL navigates to /header. Let's test it out. Okay, so basically we are providing a location, and based on that we can import a specific application. And so header only load with the route /header. Summary. Micro frontends are implementations of microservices for the front end. Modern web apps are becoming more and more complex, and most of the code lives on the client side. So with this micro front-end approach, we can make it easier to understand, develop, test, and deploy larger applications. There are so many advantages to using this. Each app can be independent. They don't share logic. It's tempting to use a different framework for each app, but not recommended. Remember, this approach should make your life easier. We can split the apps by domain, feature, page, section. And okay, so this is just the summary. There are 2 frameworks which we just talked about. You don't need frameworks to implement it, but using one can make your transition from monolith to micro frontends easier. And don't use it for small apps, just make that one app. Conclusion, I know micro frontends is such a trendy thing, but you should not use it for every app. Don't use it if your app is small, don't complicate things, and this approach should make your process seamless, not overcomplicated, so use your best judgment before using this approach. Okay, so that was it for the blog. I guess the key parts were basically using this single SPA library and using that to import the different micro frontends into our HTML page. This blog can be found on Medium, and it is by Bhargav Bachina, so I encourage you to go check that out to get the actual code of the HTML page. And that's it for this video on how to implement micro frontend architecture with Angular.